Hi everyone, it's William with the Grand Duke Dmitri 1921 Diary Series. It is currently Christmas Eve, the 23rd of December 2024. With Dmitri, we are in February, so we have a short diary entry today, but it's packed with people. So the recap for the previous diary entry of the 25th of February, we have a nice long conversation with Seryoja Dolgoruki, in which Dmitri sort of, to the extent that he was willing to go, confided in, I can't really say poured out his heart, because he didn't really do that, and he didn't even broach the issue of Marie-Louise, but he did talk about some of the things that were bothering him. And at the end of the day, in the wee hours of the morning, in fact, he had a similar conversation, apparently, with Marling over whiskey and soda after a long night at a party. And in the middle of the day, he had a conversation with the Countess Mengden, who had been someone he knew well before the revolution. So that was a really, in a way, a really nice day for him, to be able to talk to people that he could feel perfectly at ease with about important topics. So what cast of characters do we have for today? Well, the Marlings, of course. Meyendorff, who is the Russian envoy to Denmark, such as it is. He's not a Bolshevik. He belongs to the previous pre-revolutionary diplomatic corps, but he's still holding down the fort in Denmark. Olga Alsufyev, Vasily Alsufyev, and the old Countess Alsufyev. Alsufyeva. Yeah, that name is a tough one even for me. So the old Countess and her husband were, well, the old Countess, I'm not sure about her husband, but the one that Dmitri refers to as the old Countess Alsufyeva was actually the head of Grand Duchess Ella's, the female part of the, well, her little court, the ladies in waiting. She took charge of that. And she was someone, if you've been following these all along, and if you go back to the 1906-1907, well, the 1907 diary entries in the Crimea, while staying in the Crimea, Dmitri and Maria went and visited old Countess Alsufyeva and her husband, who was still alive at that time, and they'd known them since they were quite young, and they were sort of en famille with Ella. And so naturally the kids went and spent a few evenings with them when they were in the Crimea. So the younger generation, we have the son, Vasily Alsufyev, and his wife, Olga. And Vasily and the old Countess are not present in Denmark, but Olga Alsufyev is. So like with the Mengdens, that's a chance for Dmitri to reminisce about old times. There's Grand Duchess Elizabeth is mentioned, obviously also not present since she's deceased. Then we have the Countess Wedel, who is an aunt, I think, of Marie-Louise. We have Marie-Louise herself. We have another Marie-Louise. This one is Marie-Louise Freegast. And we have Madame Turner, Madame Scavenius. So Marie-Louise Freegast, I'm not sure how she comes into the picture. All of these people are connected, if not actually related to each other. But she was in her early 20s, a woman in her early 20s, but already married. Yeah, and then there is a mention of another person who's not present, who is Count Alexander Pavlovich Shuvalov, the Shuvalovs being a very prominent noble family in pre-revolutionary Russia, and Dmitri refers to him as Sesh, and he's somebody's brother. I think he's Olga Alsufiev's brother. So this is like the opening pages of War and Peace. Everybody stops reading because they're so put off by all the difficult names and the complicated relationships, but that's all. That's all we have. So we're going straight into the diary entry now, and instead of doing these introductions on the other side, when you hear the names mentioned in the diary entry, you'll know basically what you need to know about who they are. Okay, and Vasily Alsufiev, who also is not present. He's in his 40s, Olga's in her 30s, and Dmitri refers to him as Vasi. Okay, 26th of February, 1921. It's a Saturday in Copenhagen, and Dmitri is staying at the English mission. And here we go. I spent the whole morning writing in my diary. At 1:30, the Marlings and I went to Ambassador Meyendorf's for lunch. It was a farewell get-together for me. There were masses of people, especially after lunch. Incidentally, Countess Alsufieva was there, the wife of Vasi. Her maiden name is Shuvalova, and she's Sesha's sister. Naturally, I spent a lot of time talking to her, reminiscing about the old days, Moscow, Petrograd, Ella, old Countess Alsufieva, and many others. We had to stay at Meyendorf's until 4:30. They even served chocolate, which was quite a pleasure. At 5 o'clock, I went to the Wedels, supposedly to have tea with the Countess, but she tactfully withdrew, and I had a chance to be à deux with Marie-Louise, whom, of course, I liked even more than before. It was around 8 o'clock by the time I got home. I dined with the Marlings at the Freegasts. She is the sister of Madame Turner and Madame Scavenius. Overall, it was pretty boring, and on top of everything else, I'd simply been to too many parties by that time and was truly worn out. I got home around 2 o'clock a.m. Yes, indeed, he's just being spread thin all over Copenhagen. And I don't blame him, for really not enjoying it so much anymore. Okay, so nothing really historical in this diary entry beyond the fact that it's interesting that Meyendorff is still functioning as the envoy to Denmark, and that there apparently is no Soviet envoy yet. So I'll have to look it up, but I would guess that Denmark had not recognized Soviet Russia as a legitimate state. And also for anybody doing, research on high society, in a historical context. So for the personal and the biographical, again, it's only a piece. It's only really noteworthy insofar as it's a piece of the big picture. Although one thing that interests me here is that Dmitri refers to his aunt as just Ella, instead of Aunt Ella or Tyotia, which is what he called her back before the revolution. When he was a teenage boy, he called her Tyotia, which means aunt or auntie. He just calls her Ella. So, that's a little bit interesting, at least to me. And yes, a little bit on the tenses. It's difficult sometimes to decide whether to use the simple past or the past perfect in any of its forms, because of course we know that Dmitri is writing this about 2 weeks after the actual events. So sometimes to say things like in relation to Marie-Louise, I like, do you say I like even more than before? I liked her even more than before. I like her even more than before. That doesn't involve the past perfect, but at the, I don't know yet at the time that he's writing, if he still feels like he, if he's already forgotten about her, if he still feels like I like that he he still likes her even more than before. I don't know. On that evening, when he met with her, he thought, I like her even more than before. Every time I see her, I like her even more than before. So, yeah, it can be tricky about tense. One thing that I thought was funny in this was picturing the scene in Pride and Prejudice when a suitor comes to the household. It's the horrible Mr. Collins, and Mrs. What is her name? What is their last name? Mrs. Bennet is terribly keen to make sure that Elizabeth is left alone with Mr. Collins so that Mr. Collins can propose to her. And I wonder if that is what Countess Wedel had in mind when she tactfully withdrew, as Dmitri puts it, so that he and Marie-Louise could be à deux, just the two of them. And he appreciated that because he wanted to spend time alone with her. But I wonder if she actually had the ulterior motive of thinking, he might actually pop the question. I don't have any way to know that, but it amuses me to think of the scene in Pride and Prejudice and how that might have been playing out in Copenhagen on that day. I wish I knew what I wish he'd told us what he said to Marie-Louise, because he was leaving. And he didn't want to lead her on. He told us earlier that he was not going to mention that he was considering her as a marital prospect because there were just too many things that he felt conflicted about. All right, so what do we have in the next diary entry? Well, again, we have a lot of people, but mostly they're people that we already know. And we have an interesting outing to a medieval castle, I guess you would call it, called Dragsholm, that I think was actually built in the 13th century, but very, very old. And in this instance, it's a private residence, and they're going there with the hostess herself. So they're able to go inside. They take several cars. There are lots of people. And yeah, it's interesting stuff, I assure you. So come back for that. And I should also point out that this diary entry that we just finished is the 26th of February, and the 28th of February will be Dmitri's last day in Copenhagen. So we'll have this outing on the 27th, and then we'll be able to see how he spends his last day in Copenhagen and farewells and that sort of thing, and what his thoughts are about returning to Paris. And then we'll be jumping forward to the 15th of March, back in Paris and resuming his life there. And I, for one, I think am ready to go back to Paris and the Russian emigre community. It's been grand being in Denmark, but I'm really interested in what's going to go on when he gets back. All right, so I hope to see you then. Bye.